Sometimes the people begging for a chance are the same people powerful men should fear losing. Rain hammered against the glass walls of Hayes Corporation as hundreds of employees rushed through the massive lobby, without noticing the woman standing near the reception desk in a soaked gray coat that looked 2 winters too old for New York weather. Emma Carter tightened her grip around a cheap leather folder while trying to keep her hands from shaking. Inside that folder were 3 copies of her resume, a handwritten list of overdue bills, and exactly $47 folded into the back pocket beside a photo of her 8-year-old son. She had been standing there for almost an hour, waiting for someone to call her name, but every few minutes another applicant walked past her toward the elevators while the receptionist avoided eye contact like Emma didn't even exist. "Ma'am, I already told you the interviews are over," the receptionist said again with an exhausted sigh. "You can apply online." Emma swallowed hard. "I did apply online. 7 times. Then HR already made their decision." Emma looked down for a moment before quietly asking, "Could I just speak to someone for 2 minutes?" "Anyone." The receptionist's expression softened slightly until she noticed security approaching. "I'm sorry." Emma nodded slowly as if she had expected this all along. She bent down to pick up her bag, but before she could leave, a small paper slipped from the folder and landed on the polished marble floor. One of the security guards picked it up first. It wasn't a resume. It was a hospital estimate. Pediatric cardiology. The total due was circled in red ink. The guard awkwardly handed it back, and Emma's face turned pale with embarrassment. "Please," she whispered, barely able to get the words out. "My son needs surgery. I just need one opportunity." Upstairs on the 34th floor, Alexander Hayes paused the financial presentation playing on the massive monitor in his office. His security camera feed had caught the interaction in the lobby by accident, but something about the woman's voice made him stop listening to the board meeting behind him. "Alex," one of the executives asked impatiently, "are we continuing?" Alexander ignored him for a moment. Through the black and white camera footage, he watched Emma quickly wipe tears from her face before straightening her shoulders like she refused to break in public. Most people begged loudly when they wanted something. She looked embarrassed, just asking to survive. "Who is she?" Alexander asked without looking away from the screen. His assistant checked the system. "Emma Carter. Applied for entry-level accounting support. No references worth mentioning. Employment gap of almost 6 years." One of the board members laughed quietly. Another desperate story from Manhattan. But Alexander kept staring at the screen. There was something strange about her resume. Ivy League education. Near-perfect academic scores. Yet somehow she was applying for a position barely above minimum wage. It didn't make sense. Downstairs, Emma finally turned toward the exit as security opened the front door for her. The cold wind rushed inside immediately. She stepped forward, then stopped when a voice echoed across the lobby. "Miss Carter." Every head turned. Alexander Hayes himself stepped out of the private elevator in a dark navy suit that probably cost more than Emma had earned all year. Employees froze instantly. Nobody expected the CEO to enter the lobby during a storm, especially not for someone like her. Emma looked stunned. Alexander walked toward her slowly, studying the exhaustion in her eyes, the water dripping from her sleeves, the hospital paper still trembling in her hand. "You want a job here?" he asked calmly. Emma nodded once. "Yes, sir." The board members watching from upstairs could barely believe what happened next. Alexander slipped one hand into his pocket and said, "I'll give you 30 days. Emma's lips parted in shock. But before relief could reach her face, he added coldly, "Because after 30 days, you'll quit on your own." Emma barely slept her first night after getting hired at Hayes Corporation because every time she closed her eyes, she heard Alexander Hayes saying the same cold sentence again. "After 30 days, you will quit on your own." By 6:30 the next morning, she was already standing outside the employee entrance wearing the only black blazer she owned, carefully stitched at the sleeve where the fabric had torn months earlier. The skyscraper looked even larger in daylight, like a world built for people who had never worried about grocery prices or overdue rent notices. Employees streamed past her carrying expensive coffee cups and talking about stock markets, Hampton's weekends, and private schools while Emma silently rehearsed how to introduce herself without sounding nervous. She checked her phone before entering the building. One unread message from Noah's school nurse. Reminder about medication refill. Emma closed her eyes briefly before sliding the phone back into her pocket. She only had enough money left for either groceries or the refill by Friday. Inside the accounting department, nobody looked happy to see her. "Temporary desk is over there," a woman said while pointing toward a tiny workstation beside the copy machines. Her nameplate read Victoria Sloan, Chief Operations Officer. Even without raising her voice, Victoria had the kind of sharp tone that made everyone around her sit straighter. "You are support staff only," Victoria continued. "Do not touch active financial files unless instructed. Do not speak during executive meetings. And do not mistake the chief executive officer's charity for special treatment." A few employees nearby smirked quietly. Emma simply nodded. Understood. By noon, she realized nobody intended to train her properly. She was handed stacks of invoices with no explanation, blamed for passwords she had never received, and ignored whenever she asked simple questions. At one point, two analysts standing near the printer glanced at her worn shoes before one whispered loudly enough to hear, "I heard she cried in the lobby to get hired." The other laughed. "Whatever works, I guess." Emma kept organizing paperwork as if she had not heard anything, but her cheeks burned with humiliation. Around 3 in the afternoon, a senior accountant stormed across the office holding a tablet. "Who touched the Mercer file?" he snapped. "The projections are completely wrong." Panic spread immediately through the department because the Mercer account belonged to one of Hayes Corporation's largest investors. Victoria looked furious. "Fix it before the board review at 5. Employees rushed between desks trying to identify the problem while Emma quietly watched the spreadsheet displayed on the shared monitor. After a few seconds, she noticed it. One formula buried deep inside the quarterly projection model had duplicated tax losses twice, inflating the risk estimate by almost $12 million. She hesitated before speaking carefully. "I think cell H44 is referencing the wrong table." The room fell silent for a second. One analyst scoffed immediately. "Support staff does not audit executive reports." But the senior accountant checked anyway. His expression changed instantly. Emma was right. Within minutes, the corrected numbers stabilized the entire report. "How did you catch that?" he asked, stunned. Emma shrugged lightly. "I used to work with similar forecasting systems." Victoria narrowed her eyes. "Your resume says nothing about high-level financial modeling." Emma lowered her gaze. "I have not used those skills in a long time." Before anyone could ask more questions, the private elevator doors opened across the office floor. Alexander Hayes stepped out surrounded by executives in dark suits. Conversation stopped instantly. Emma focused on her desk, hoping he would keep walking, but halfway through the department, Alexander suddenly paused. His eyes landed on the corrected Mercer report still displayed on the monitor. "Who fixed it?" he asked calmly. Nobody answered right away. Then the senior accountant slowly pointed toward Emma. Alexander looked at her for several long seconds, almost studying her the way someone studies a puzzle with missing pieces. Emma felt her heartbeat quicken under the silence. Then Alexander finally spoke. "Interesting." And for the first time since entering Hayes Corporation, Emma realized the most dangerous thing in that building might not be the people who hated her. It might be the man who was beginning to notice her. By the end of Emma Carter's first week at Hayes Corporation, people had already decided who she was. To some employees, she was the desperate single mother who cried her way into a temporary position. To others, she was simply invisible. But to Alexander Hayes, she was becoming a problem he could not explain. Late Thursday night, long after most office lights had gone dark, Alexander stood inside his private office overlooking Manhattan while reading through Emma's personnel file for the third time. It still made no sense. Columbia University graduate. Top honors in finance and economic analytics. Internship history that should have led to six-figure offers before the age of 25. Then suddenly, 6 years of missing records. No major employers. No social presence. No professional references beyond part-time bookkeeping jobs in small neighborhoods across Brooklyn and Queens. It was as if someone had erased an entire life. "You are investigating a temporary employee?" his assistant Daniel asked carefully while organizing papers near the desk. Alexander did not look up. People do not accidentally forget how to analyze complex financial structures. Daniel hesitated. Maybe she had personal problems. Alexander finally closed the file. Everyone has personal problems. But even as he said it, he remembered the look on Emma's face in the lobby that rainy night. She had not looked manipulative. She had looked exhausted. Meanwhile, 3 floors below, Emma sat alone in the employee break room eating instant oatmeal from a paper cup while reviewing expense reports under the buzzing fluorescent lights. It was almost 9 at night, but she still had another hour of subway travel before reaching her apartment in Queens. Her phone suddenly vibrated. Noah. Emma answered immediately. Hey, baby. Mom, are you still at work? Noah's sleepy voice made guilt twist inside her chest. Just finishing up. Miss Hernandez said I should not wait up anymore. Emma closed her eyes briefly. Their elderly neighbor had been watching Noah after school all week because Emma could not afford extended childcare. I am sorry, sweetheart. Did you eat dinner? Noah asked quietly. Emma looked down at the oatmeal cup. Yes. It was a lie. Noah lowered his voice like he was sharing a secret. I told Miss Hernandez not to throw away the chicken from lunch because you forgot groceries again. Emma felt her throat tighten instantly. Noah. It is okay, he said quickly. When I get bigger, I am going to buy you a huge house with real stairs. Emma smiled despite the tears building in her eyes. You already make my life better. After hanging up, she stared silently at the old photograph tucked inside her wallet. A younger version of herself standing beside a smiling man in front of a building with the Hayes Foundation logo in the background. Before she could look longer, footsteps approached the break room. Emma quickly slipped the photo away just as Victoria Sloan entered holding a tablet. Still here? Victoria asked coldly. Dedicated employees are usually impressive. Desperate employees are usually dangerous. Emma stood immediately. I was just finishing the Mercer revisions. Victoria stepped closer. You know what bothers me about you? Emma remained silent. You act small, but you watch everything. Victoria's eyes narrowed slightly. People like you always have an angle. Before Emma could answer, Victoria's phone buzzed. She glanced down at the screen, then her expression shifted almost imperceptibly. For the first time, Emma noticed something unexpected behind the woman's icy confidence. Fear. Victoria quickly locked the screen and walked away without another word. Minutes later, as Emma returned to her desk, she noticed a black luxury car waiting outside the building entrance through the lobby windows. Alexander Hayes stood beside it speaking with someone on the phone while rain reflected across the sidewalk around him. Then suddenly, he looked up toward the office floors above, directly toward her window. Emma stepped back instinctively from the glass, her heartbeat quickening again. Because deep down, she was starting to realize something dangerous too. Alexander Hayes was no longer just curious about her. He was searching for answers. The most dangerous secrets are the ones powerful people pretend no longer exist. Monday morning arrived with freezing wind sweeping through Midtown Manhattan as Emma Carter hurried out of the subway station carrying a paper bag filled with generic cough medicine and a children's inhaler she could barely afford. Noah had started coughing again during the night, but he still smiled before school and told her not to worry because superheroes do not get sick twice. Emma kept replaying those words in her mind while entering Hayes Corporation, trying to ignore the anxiety sitting heavily in her chest. It was day 11 of her 30-day trial, and every morning still felt like walking into a building that wanted her gone. The accounting floor buzzed with unusual tension the moment she arrived. Analysts moved quickly between desks while several executives gathered near the conference rooms speaking in hushed voices. Emma quietly placed her bag beneath her desk before opening the overnight reports. Something was wrong immediately. One of the company's international investment accounts showed a discrepancy large enough to trigger a federal compliance review if discovered publicly. Millions of dollars had been moved through a temporary holding account with authorization codes that did not match the internal ledger system. Emma frowned while scanning the transaction trail. The transfers were disguised carefully, but not carefully enough. Someone had manipulated reporting timestamps to delay visibility until the next quarter. Nobody leaves until this is fixed, Victoria Sloan announced sharply while entering the department. The board review is tomorrow morning. Panic spread across the room. Several senior accountants began arguing over spreadsheets, while others blamed software errors. Emma remained quiet, studying the transfer patterns again and again. Then she noticed something strange. The transaction sequence was not random. It followed a structure she recognized from years ago. A structure designed to temporarily hide liabilities during merger negotiations. Her stomach tightened instantly. Before she could think further, Victoria approached her desk. Coffee run, she said coldly, dropping a list onto Emma's keyboard without even looking at her. Emma stared at the list for a second before softly asking, "Do you want me to prioritize the audit? Discrepancy first." Victoria finally looked at her directly. "Your job is support staff, not strategy." Several nearby employees smirked quietly again. Emma nodded and stood to grab her coat, but just as she turned away, one of the senior analysts cursed under his breath. "The numbers still do not balance." Emma hesitated. Then slowly, she walked back toward the monitor. "The timestamp delays are linked to offshore settlement windows," she said carefully. "You are tracing the wrong quarter." The room fell silent again. Victoria's eyes narrowed instantly. "Excuse me." Emma stepped closer to the screen despite every instinct telling her not to. The funds were rerouted through staggered processing cycles. Whoever did this expected auditors to search domestic timing logs first. One analyst blinked in confusion. "How would you even know that?" Emma froze for half a second before answering quietly. "I studied similar cases in graduate research." Victoria stared at her with growing suspicion while the analysts quickly tested Emma's theory. Within minutes, the hidden transfer trail appeared on screen exactly where Emma predicted. Relief spread through the department immediately. "This fixes everything," one accountant breathed. "It buys us enough time before the board meeting." Victoria's expression darkened instead of relaxing. She stepped toward Emma slowly. "Where exactly did you study financial concealment methods like this?" Emma's pulse quickened. "I told you. Research." But Victoria did not look convinced. Before she could press further, the private elevator doors opened again. Alexander Hayes entered with Daniel beside him while discussing legal exposure reports. The entire department straightened immediately. Alexander barely acknowledged anyone until his eyes landed on the corrected audit screen. Then he noticed Emma standing beside it. "What happened?" he asked calmly. One of the analysts answered before Victoria could speak. Emma found the hidden settlement pattern. Alexander's gaze shifted toward her slowly. Not impressed, not surprised, concerned, and somehow that felt far more dangerous. He walked closer to the monitor, studying the transaction. Structure in silence before speaking quietly enough that only Emma could hear. "Most people would never recognize this pattern." Emma looked away immediately. "Maybe most people are smarter than me." Alexander almost smiled for the first time since she met him. "No," he said softly. "I think most people are hiding less than you are." People at Hayes Corporation started watching Emma Carter differently after the audit incident. Not with respect, with suspicion. By the beginning of week 3, whispers followed her through the accounting floor every morning. Some employees believed she had lied on her resume. Others thought she was secretly connected to a rival firm trying to gain insider information. But the rumor spreading fastest was the one nobody dared say loudly around Victoria Sloan. The chief executive officer himself was paying attention to her. Emma tried to ignore it all. She arrived early, left late, and spent every lunch break calculating medical bills on a tiny notepad hidden beneath spreadsheets. Noah's surgery deposit deadline was now only 12 days away, and despite working nonstop, she was still thousands of dollars short. That Thursday evening, freezing rain covered Manhattan again as most employees rushed home before the storm worsened. Emma remained alone at her desk correcting expense reports under the dim office lights while quietly coughing into her sleeve. She had not eaten since morning, but she kept working because overtime hours meant another small increase on her paycheck. Around 8:15, her phone rang suddenly. The school number. Emma answered instantly with panic already rising in her chest. "Hello, Miss Carter," the school nurse said gently. "Noah had trouble breathing during after-school activities today. He is stable now, but his inhaler is almost empty." Emma closed her eyes immediately. "I am coming right now." She grabbed her coat so quickly that several folders slid off her desk onto the floor. Papers scattered everywhere. Emma dropped to her knees trying to gather them before leaving, but another pair of hands suddenly reached down beside her. Alexander Hayes. Emma froze. He picked up several pages calmly before handing them back to her. "You are still here?" he asked. Emma quickly stood. "I need to leave. My son is sick." Something changed instantly in Alexander's expression at the word son. "What happened?" "Asthma complications." She avoided eye contact while shoving papers into the folders. "The subway will take too long." Before Emma could react, Alexander reached for his car keys. "I will drive you." "That is not necessary." Neither is letting your child wait while you argue with me. 20 minutes later, Emma sat stiffly inside the back seat of Alexander's Blacktown car, while city lights blurred across rain-covered windows. She hated accepting help from anyone, especially him. Men with power always expected something eventually. That lesson had cost her everything once already. "How old is your son?" Alexander asked quietly while driving through traffic himself instead of using a chauffeur. 8. "Does he know where you work?" Emma nodded faintly. "He thinks I work in a castle." To her surprise, Alexander laughed softly under his breath. The sound felt strange coming from someone usually so controlled. "Smart kid." When they finally arrived at the small apartment building in Queens, Emma thanked him quickly and hurried upstairs. But before she could unlock the apartment door, Noah suddenly swung it open himself. "Mom!" he shouted before stopping in surprise at the sight of Alexander behind her. Noah looked between them with wide eyes. "Whoa!" Emma immediately frowned. "You should be resting." But Noah barely heard her. He stared at Alexander's expensive suit like he had just stepped out of one of the superhero movies he loved. "Are you famous?" he asked seriously. Alexander actually smiled this time. "Not really." Noah crossed his arms thoughtfully. "You look rich." Emma covered her face in embarrassment. "Noah." But Alexander crouched slightly to meet the boy's eye level. "I have been accused of that before." Noah grinned. "Are you my mom's boss?" Alexander glanced briefly toward Emma before answering. "Something like that." Noah lowered his voice dramatically. "Then please do not fire her. She cries when she thinks I am asleep." The apartment suddenly became very quiet. Emma felt humiliation hit her instantly, but when she looked toward Alexander, she did not see pity in his eyes. She saw something far more dangerous. Understanding. And as Alexander slowly looked around the tiny apartment, noticing the medicine bottles near the sink, the patched furniture, and the unpaid bills stacked beside the microwave, Emma realized he was beginning to understand exactly how hard she had been fighting to survive. The next morning at Hayes Corporation felt different the moment Emma Carter stepped off the elevator. Conversations stopped when she walked past. Employees who normally ignored her suddenly glanced away too quickly, like everyone already knew Alexander Hayes had driven her home the night before. Emma kept her eyes forward and headed toward her desk, but she could feel the tension spreading through the accounting floor like static before a storm. Victoria Sloan was waiting beside her workstation. "My office," she said sharply. Emma followed her in silence. The glass office overlooked the city skyline, but Victoria did not offer her a seat. "You are becoming a distraction," she said coldly while folding her arms. "This company does not reward emotional manipulation." Emma frowned slightly. "I am just doing my job." Victoria laughed once without humor. "Do you think I have not seen women use sympathy to get close to powerful men?" Emma's voice stayed calm, but her hands tightened behind her back. "I did not ask Mr. Hayes to drive me home." "No," Victoria replied quietly. "That is what concerns me." For a moment, neither woman spoke. Then Victoria walked toward her desk and slid a thin file across the glass surface. "Your background check came back incomplete again." Emma's heartbeat slowed instantly. "There must be a mistake." "That is exactly what I thought." Victoria opened the folder. "Columbia University confirms your records. But after graduation, your entire employment history disappears for almost 6 years." Emma remained silent. "No tax records matching your qualifications. No investment licenses. No professional certifications renewed." Victoria looked directly into her eyes. "It is almost like someone intentionally erased you." Emma forced herself not to react. "I had personal reasons for leaving finance." Personal reasons do not erase databases. Before Emma could answer, someone knocked once before entering the office without waiting for permission. Alexander Hayes. Victoria's expression changed immediately. "Alexander." He barely acknowledged her before looking at Emma. "Board meeting in 10 minutes. I want Carter present." Victoria blinked in disbelief. "Support staff are not included in executive reviews." "She is now." The room became silent. Emma stared at Alexander in confusion while Victoria's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "You are putting a temporary employee in front of investors?" Victoria asked carefully. "I am putting the person who saved our compliance audit in front of investors," Alexander replied calmly. During the meeting, Emma sat quietly near the end of the massive conference table while executives discussed acquisition forecasts worth hundreds of millions of dollars. Most ignored her completely, But she noticed something strange almost immediately. Several projected growth numbers did not match the internal reports she had corrected earlier that week. Alexander noticed her studying the screen. "Something wrong?" he asked suddenly in front of everyone. Emma hesitated. Every instinct warned her to stay quiet. But finally she spoke softly. "The Southeast Division projections are overstated by 12%. The room froze. One executive scoffed immediately. "That model came from senior analysts." Emma swallowed carefully before continuing. "The retention assumptions are based on pre-litigation numbers. If the pending lawsuit becomes public, the valuation drops." Silence spread across the conference room while analysts quickly reviewed the data. Then one of them looked up slowly. "She is right." Several executives exchanged uneasy glances. Alexander leaned back slightly in his chair, watching Emma with growing fascination. "How did you catch that so quickly?" Emma looked down at the documents in front of her. Patterns repeat. After the meeting ended, executives quietly filed out while whispering among themselves. Emma gathered her papers quickly, hoping to escape before more questions came. But as she reached the hallway, Alexander's voice stopped her. "Walk with me." She followed him toward the private executive corridor overlooking the city. For a while, neither spoke. Then Alexander finally asked the question she had been dreading for days. "Who taught you to analyze corporate risk like that?" Emma looked out the window instead of at him. "Someone I used to know." "And where is that person now?" Her expression shifted slightly. "Sadness. Regret. Maybe guilt. Gone." Alexander studied her carefully. "Emma, every time I think I understand you, another piece does not fit." She gave a faint, tired smile. "Maybe some people are not meant to fit anywhere." Alexander looked like he wanted to say something else, but before he could, his phone rang. He glanced at the screen, and his expression darkened instantly. "What happened?" he asked sharply into the phone. Emma turned slightly as his voice lowered. Then she heard the words that made the color drain from her face. "You found records connected to the Hayes scandal from 15 years ago?" Emma Carter did not breathe normally again until she reached the subway platform that night. The words "Hayes scandal from 15 years ago" kept echoing inside her mind while crowds rushed around her through the underground station. She pulled her coat tighter and stared down at the worn photograph hidden inside her wallet once more. Her father smiling beside the old Hayes Foundation building. The picture had faded at the corners after years of being folded and unfolded during nights when she almost lost hope. "You promised me the truth mattered," she whispered softly to the photo before putting it away again. Back at Hayes Corporation, Alexander Hayes stood alone inside his office reading through a confidential report Daniel had delivered minutes earlier. The file was thin, but its contents made his expression darken more with every page. 15 years ago, Hayes Corporation had quietly settled a financial scandal involving manipulated acquisition reports and the sudden disappearance of a senior partner named Thomas Carter. Officially, the case ended after Thomas resigned under suspicion of fraud. Unofficially, rumors claimed someone inside the company framed him to protect larger executives from investigation. Alexander rubbed his jaw slowly while staring at one line in particular. "Survived by daughter, Emma Carter." A cold realization settled heavily in his chest. "It cannot be coincidence," Daniel said carefully. "You think she came here intentionally?" Alexander looked back toward the city skyline beyond the glass windows. "I think someone erased her life for a reason." The next morning, Emma arrived at work exhausted after barely sleeping. Noah's coughing had worsened overnight, and she had spent half the night beside his bed checking his breathing every few minutes. But the moment she stepped onto the accounting floor, she realized something had changed again. Employees stopped talking entirely this time. Several glanced toward her with open curiosity instead of quiet mockery. One analyst quickly looked away the moment she noticed him staring at her computer profile on the internal system. Emma's stomach tightened. Someone had started digging. Before she reached her desk, Victoria Sloan intercepted her near the elevators. "Conference room." "Now." Emma followed silently. The moment the glass doors shut behind them, Victoria tossed a folder onto the table. Emma froze instantly when she saw the name printed across the top. "Thomas Carter. You lied on your employment disclosure forms," Victoria said coldly. Emma looked up slowly. "I did not lie. You failed to disclose direct family connections to a historical corporate investigation involving this company." Emma's voice stayed calm despite her pulse racing. "The investigation was closed years ago. Victoria stepped closer. Not for everyone. Emma finally met her eyes directly. What exactly are you accusing me of? Victoria's expression hardened. I think you came here for revenge. Before Emma could answer, the conference room doors opened suddenly. Alexander entered. His eyes moved immediately between the folder on the table and Emma's pale expression. Leave us, he told Victoria calmly. This concerns executive security, Victoria argued. Now, Victoria hesitated before finally walking out, though the look she gave Emma before leaving carried something sharper than suspicion now. Fear. The room became silent. Emma stared down at the folder while Alexander slowly approached the table. Why did you not tell me who your father was? He asked quietly. Emma laughed once under her breath, but there was no humor in it. Because men in expensive offices already decided who he was before I was old enough to understand what happened. Alexander studied her carefully. The reports say he manipulated corporate numbers. Emma looked up instantly, pain flashing across her face. The reports say a lot of things. Neither spoke for several seconds. Finally, Alexander asked the question she had feared most. Did you come here because of what happened 15 years ago? Emma's eyes glistened slightly, but her voice remained steady. I came here because my son needs surgery. Alexander held her gaze. And the rest? Emma looked away toward the rain beginning to hit the windows outside. The rest, she whispered softly, is more complicated. Then, before Alexander could ask another question, the conference room television suddenly switched on automatically with an emergency corporate alert. A headline appeared across the screen in bold letters. Leaked documents may reopen Hayes Corporation scandal. And beneath the headline was a photograph taken 15 years earlier. A photograph of Thomas Carter standing beside a much younger Victoria Sloan. Within hours, the leaked story spread across every financial news outlet in New York. Reporters crowded outside Hayes Corporation while investors flooded executive offices with demands for answers. By noon, the company's stock had already begun slipping, and employees whispered nervously through every hallway about the reopened scandal tied to Thomas Carter. Emma Carter sat frozen at her desk, while headlines flashed across computer screens around the office. Former Hayes executive linked to corporate cover-up. New evidence questions original fraud investigation. Photo emerges connecting Victoria Sloan to missing financial records. Emma felt sick reading the articles because none of them told the full truth. They never had. 15 years earlier, her father had tried to expose manipulated acquisition reports hidden inside Hayes Corporation. 2 days later, he became the public scapegoat for the entire scandal. Their family lost everything almost overnight. Friends disappeared. Reporters camped outside their home. Her father spent the rest of his life trying to clear his name before dying with the world still believing he was guilty. Emma had sworn years ago she would never return to anything connected to Hayes Corporation again. But then Noah got sick, and desperation had brought her back to the one place she hated most. Across the executive floor, an emergency board meeting erupted into chaos. We need immediate damage control, one investor shouted. The media already thinks the company buried evidence. Victoria Sloan remained composed on the outside, but Alexander noticed the tension in her face every time Thomas Carter's name appeared on screen. The leaked photograph proves nothing, Victoria argued sharply. I worked with dozens of executives back then. Then why were the files hidden? Another board member demanded. Alexander stayed silent through most of the argument while reviewing confidential documents Daniel had recovered overnight. The deeper he looked, the worse the timeline became. Deleted compliance records. Altered timestamps. Internal reports missing signatures. Someone inside the company had absolutely manipulated evidence 15 years ago, and every trail somehow circled back toward Victoria Sloan. Meanwhile, downstairs, Emma quietly packed her bag. She could already feel the company turning against her. Employees avoided eye contact completely now, and several security officers had appeared near the elevators. She knew how these situations ended. Powerful corporations protected themselves first. They always did. Just as she reached for her coat, Alexander appeared beside her desk unexpectedly. Where are you going? He asked. Emma gave a tired smile. You already know the answer. No, I do not. Your board is panicking. Your investors think I am connected to this leak. Victoria probably wants me removed before the market closes. Alexander stepped closer. And what do you want? Emma looked down for a moment before answering honestly. I want my son to survive surgery. The simplicity of the answer hit him harder than any accusation could have. Not revenge. Not money. Just survival. Alexander lowered his voice. Emma, if someone framed your father, I need the truth. She laughed softly, though sadness filled the sound completely. Truth does not matter when powerful people decide the story first. Before Alexander could respond, his phone rang again. Daniel's voice came through urgently. You need to get to the boardroom now. Edward Hayes just arrived. Alexander's expression changed instantly. My father, and he is asking for Emma Carter specifically. 20 minutes later, the executive boardroom stood completely silent as Emma entered beside Alexander. Senior investors stared openly at her while reporters waited outside the building downstairs. At the far end of the table sat Edward Hayes, the aging founder of Hayes Corporation, whose health had kept him away from public business for years. The old man looked directly at Emma the moment she entered. Then slowly, painfully, he stood to his feet. Several executives looked confused as Edward's eyes filled with visible emotion. You look exactly like your father, he said quietly. The room froze. Emma's hands trembled slightly at her sides. Edward reached into his briefcase and removed a sealed envelope worn with age. Thomas Carter gave me this 15 years ago, he continued, and I was too much of a coward to open it. Victoria Sloan suddenly stood up, so quickly her chair slammed against the floor. Edward, do not do this. But the old man ignored her completely. He handed the envelope directly to Emma. Across the front, written in faded ink, were 6 words that instantly shattered the air inside the room. If anything happens to me. The boardroom remained completely silent as Emma Carter slowly opened the envelope with trembling hands. The paper inside had yellowed with age, and for a moment, she could barely focus through the emotions flooding her chest. Then she recognized her father's handwriting instantly. If anything happens to me, it means I was right about the numbers. Emma swallowed hard while continuing to read. Across the long conference table, executives watched in stunned silence as decades of hidden truth began unfolding in real time. Thomas Carter's letter detailed everything. Internal financial manipulation, delayed compliance reports, illegal transfer structures hidden during a major acquisition 15 years earlier. But the line that changed the room forever came near the bottom of the page. Victoria Sloan authorized the false reporting procedures after executive pressure to protect investor confidence. Victoria stood abruptly. That letter proves nothing. But Edward Hayes slammed his hand against the table hard enough to silence the room. I protected you, the old man said with visible shame in his voice. Thomas warned me someone inside this company would destroy him to protect the corporation, and I let it happen because I was afraid the scandal would collapse everything we built. Emma looked up slowly, tears filling her eyes as years of anger and grief crashed together inside her chest. My father lost everything, she whispered. People spat at him in grocery stores. He could not find work. He died believing the world thought he was a criminal. Victoria's composure finally cracked. I was trying to save the company. No, Alexander Hayes said coldly for the first time since entering the room. You were trying to save yourself. Every executive turned toward him as he stood beside Emma. Effective immediately, Victoria Sloan is suspended pending formal investigation. Victoria stared at Alexander in disbelief. You are destroying this company over a dead man's accusations. Alexander's jaw tightened. No, we almost destroyed this company 15 years ago by abandoning the truth. Security quietly entered moments later as Victoria gathered her belongings with shaking hands. Before leaving, she looked directly at Emma. You think this fixes your life? Emma held her gaze calmly. No, but it finally gives my father his name back. Hours later, news alerts exploded across every financial network in America. Hayes Corporation officially reopens historical fraud investigation. Thomas Carter cleared of wrongdoing after 15 years. Outside the skyscraper, reporters crowded the streets while employees watched headlines update across lobby television screens. But for the first time since walking into Hayes Corporation, Emma no longer felt invisible. That evening, long after the building emptied, Emma stood alone near the executive windows overlooking Manhattan. The city lights blurred through tears she had spent 15 years holding back. Behind her, Alexander approached quietly. The board approved a compensation package for your family, he said softly. Emma nodded faintly. Thank you. Your son's surgery will be covered entirely. Emma closed her eyes briefly as relief finally hit her all at once. For the first time in months, maybe years, she felt like she could breathe again. Alexander stepped closer beside her. You had every reason to hate this company. Emma gave a small tired laugh. I did hate it. Then why stay? She looked out over the city before answering honestly. Because my father believed good people still existed here. Silence settled between them, warm and strangely peaceful compared to the chaos of the day. Finally, Alexander spoke again, quieter this time. Emma, when I hired you, I thought you would quit after 30 days. She smiled faintly through lingering tears. Honestly, so did I. He looked at her for several long seconds before continuing. But somewhere between the late nights, the spreadsheets, and watching you fight for your son while carrying all this pain alone, he stopped himself briefly, like the words mattered more than he expected. You changed this company, and you changed me. Emma looked at him carefully, seeing no pity in his eyes anymore. Only sincerity. Downstairs, snow had begun falling softly across Manhattan streets while the city glowed beneath the winter night. Alexander reached into his coat pocket and handed Emma a small document folder. She opened it slowly in confusion. Inside was a new executive contract. Chief Financial Strategy Advisor. Emma looked up in shock. Alexander, your father deserved to be heard 15 years ago, he said quietly. I would like his daughter to finally have a seat at the table. Emma stared at the contract while emotions tightened in her throat again. Then her phone buzzed softly. A text from Noah. Miss Hernandez says superheroes always come back after hard battles. Emma smiled through tears before looking back at Alexander. And for the first time in 15 years, the future no longer felt like something she needed to survive alone.